And it seems like we are live. Hopefully, the live chat can guide us to truth in regards to whether we are actually available for you to listen to us or not. Just recently finished the stream with Jay Dyer on Rockfin on this issue. Now I'm back here on YouTube talking about the same topic again. This will be a continuation stream with my good friend Conrad on the Ukraine situation, which is going to be again nice, polite language so that YouTube likes us, right? It seems like we don't. It seems like YouTube is saying, yeah, you guys can have your little fun. We appreciate that. But welcome to everyone in the audience. It seems like we already got like more than 30 concurrent viewers, which is quite decent. 34 likes. I hope you can hear me in the live chat. If you could give me a feedback on that, it would be great. How are you doing, Conrad? Let's hear from you as well.
I'm good. I hope everyone can hear me as well. I'm using a slightly better mic this time, and I'm in my own room, not a hotel. So maybe I'll be a little more focused, a little more aware. But yeah, I mean, I also just want to say that our analysis last time, what was that like? I don't even remember how long ago it was now, like 10 days ago or something. But
like in 9 days, I think.
But it's definitely been some of the more prescient analysis, and I think people who listen to our analysis at the beginning of this, as opposed to more mainstream stuff, I think they're wiser for it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talked about it in that stream, we got 11,000 views. I mean, that's a lot for my channel. I mean, 5 digits for me, that's a lot. So thank you, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed this and shared this around as well, because I'm not someone who loves talking about, oh, there's so much falsehood. We just like to talk about truth, but it's like it's really kind of just that way, because the disinfo campaign about this war is like unprecedented. It's incomparable how many lies there are. I mean, again, I made a video specifically talking about this, which also is a quite successful video on the Ukraine war lies, where you have ghosts of Kiev and all of these like obviously false, like literal myths that people have made up. But one of the things that we talked about, for instance, that's been vindicated is that today, Zelensky has openly said that he's willing to compromise on Russia with relation to independence in the Donbas region and the recognition of Crimea. Now, I didn't talk about Crimea in the stream, but it's kind of like an obvious thing already, like recognition of Crimea from Ukraine. But what did we say in the stream? We said that what Russia wants is independence in Donetsk and Luhansk and a neutral status in Ukraine. For Ukraine to adopt a neutral status. Guess what? Both Russia and Ukraine said, yes, this is what Russia wants. So, when everyone was panicking and saying, oh, this is World War III, or Russia's going to fulfill Soviet fantasies, what did we say? We say, this is what Russia wants. This is what this war is for. And the Russian side and the Ukrainian side has confirmed this to be the case, which, this was already quite obvious from our standpoint. But that's one of the things that we talked about, especially that came to pass, I will say. While, again, everyone else in the world was panicking and coming up with stupid theories that had no basis in reality. So that's kind of what I wanted to start. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, no, I think the fact that we, better than other people at least, and there were other people that got it as well, they were just less amplified, is that that helps inform our analysis now of how it's going. And that explains a lot of the on-the-ground situation. And people are posting maps that, oh, Russia's only taken even people will say like Russia's only taken a quarter of Ukraine and it's been 2 weeks. This is like a total failure. This is military catastrophe. Like, I almost don't even want to like engage somebody who thinks something like that, but you have to, because there's so many of them. Even if all of the logistical failures that we're supposedly hearing about on the Russian lines were true, that time frame means nothing regarding a defeat. Like, that time frame is still perfectly within the grounds of a successful military operation. And I'm not saying that because I'm so rooting for a epic, successful Russian blitzkrieg. It's because that's just obviously what's happening. And even the United States, people forget about this, totally knew that this was how it would go, because the United States, when they keep sending weapons to Ukraine, in the 2, 3, 4 months before this, they had like a policy provision. They sent documents, they sent white papers to their embassy, to the Kiev regime, about preparing to fight a like multi-year long Vietnam-style guerrilla war against the Russian army, which is total clownery. If you know any, I mean, the geography of Ukraine is not good for a guerrilla war. I don't think people in America might think this, but anyone who lives near Ukraine, I don't think has any illusions that the Ukrainian people are willing to fight a multi-year long guerrilla war for the Ukrainian government and all these sorts of things. So this idea that what we're seeing now is just like a total epic resistance holding back the Russian line, that's just not what's happening. Russia, like, I think some people even more on the Western media side have called it a handbrake invasion. They're really kind of holding back a lot of their main forces. They focused with targeted artillery, and even that wasn't the bulk of their artillery. There's minimal use of cruise missiles and stuff like that. The Russian Air Force has been minimally deployed, and that's, of course, to reduce civilian casualties. And there's 3 fronts of this war, obviously. There's the information war, which is the one that we're all forced to engage in. Then there's the military and economic wars. And those two and this one are often like they're not even talking about the same thing. And I would say at least that Russia is actually winning the economic and military war, and for lack of a better way of putting it, losing the information war, because frankly, I think they're more focused on shoring up domestic support than having a bunch of Americans think that they're doing okay.
And before I move on to like my take on that issue, I just want to say to those who are watching the live stream, if you want to ask questions, like a pointed question, you can give us super chat donations. We will read them out and we will answer those questions. If you want to support my channel in a more like long-term financial manner, or even immediately, you could also give super chats, but also subscribe to my Patreon. I'll only shield this once and only at the end. Okay, promise. Having said that, the point about the war being multifaceted and having multiple aspects, and we're going to be talking about the special needs battalion, the 4-letter battalion. I think you know what I'm referring to. We're going to be talking about all of that kind of stuff. But what I want to start with right now is kind of like the title of this video: who is winning right now, and why is everyone else losing, including the winners, right? Kind of. So, according to Chinese wisdom, wars are kind of determined even before they are declared because of the planning involved, etc. The moment the war is declared, it's kind of like the result is already apparent. You're just going through the motions. And I think my personal opinion is that that's what is happening. There are certain things that can be changed and certain things that are not going to change unless something radical happens, right? So, for example, a declaration of war by the United States against Russia, for example, that will be something radical, right? But I believe, especially in the first 3-4 hours of the war, I think the victor has already been declared in the military side of the conflict. Whether you like it or not, I do believe it is Russia. Now, maybe in a couple of weeks or even months, I'm going to be looking like a total fool. If that's the case, so be it. It's just kind of like my personal opinion. And the reason is, first of all, primarily is because the complete neutralization of the military targets in Ukraine, right? The airfields and armament factories, etc. The utter neutralization of them was very effective at the start of the war. And if you want to kind of have a sustenance, if you want to sustain your efforts, you need them. Ukraine doesn't have them. Another reason is kind of like the plans and the way it was initiated. So you made the point, for example, Conrad, about how some people are saying this is going terrible. Well, the Iraq war, for example, a couple of years ago by the US, that was a very swift victory for the United States. That lasted a little less than a month, right? The complete invasion. Ukraine, on the other hand, is much larger, right? It has territories that are, comparably more difficult to invade, whereas, there's going to be, in Iraq, there's kind of going to be places where, like, they're not even going to bother defending. Whereas in Ukraine, there's multiple really important cities to be defending. And also kind of like the intentions of Russia, the lack of civilian casualties. And this is not because, we're not going to be trying to give you this impression that Russia is doing this because, oh, we care so much about the civilian lives. No, it's not really because of that. Part of it is because they don't want to give more reasons for the rest of the world to hate them. But another part of the reason is kind of just like once this is over, they don't want to antagonize the Ukrainian populace, right? That's kind of, and that's a strategically sound reason to have. I mean, if they kind of just went in like America, guns blazing, right? You're going to have just a couple of months later, you're going to have what America had with the Middle East, everyone hating the United States. Russia doesn't really want that. And there are instances where after wars were done, the two nations actually suddenly became friends. I mean, Georgia is not a good example, but you can kind of think of it that way. But there were nations that had wars and battles against each other. And then, like Bulgaria and the Roman Empire in the 9th and 10th centuries is a good example. I mean, they duked it out and then they shake hands like, yeah, I appreciate you, like some that kind of stuff. So such a thing has happened in history before. In terms of why everyone else is losing, and we can kind of get into this more in detail, is going to be the economic aspect. I mean, it's absolutely insane how the rest of the world is totally okay with the sanctions. This is maddening. I mean, in America, you're already seeing an increase in gas prices, the commodity prices. In the stream I did with Jay, one of the things that we talked about in relation to this is how much of the export Russia has, like in terms of real assets, because some people say Russia is less than 2% of the world GDP. Why should we care about their effects on the economy? Well, in terms of hard assets that actually do matter, they have, I think, 19% of the vet exports and production, 90% of the global vet, I said WHEAT if you can't understand what I'm saying. Yeah, wheat.
For everyone who doesn't understand.
All right. 19%, right? Some say it's 11%. Imagine 19% or 11% or 10% gone from the global market. The US cannot access it. Do you know what you're going to say? Oh, 10% of the price, 10% increase in price. Who can? No, that's not going to be 10%. That's going to be more like 1,000%, dude. in the long term, imagine how much of an effect it has on the economy, that in the global economy, that if you take away that much supply away from the market, what's that going to do to the price? Up. That's what's happening with gas. 11%, 17% of natural gas production, Russia, right? The US, the West, those who sanctioned Russia, they lost access to that. They lost access to 17% of the natural gas market. And there's a lot of different examples that I can give. So Russia has massive economic power that those who sanction it cannot access at all anymore. And again, in America, it's not going to be the politicians paying for those prices, by the way. It's not going to be George Takei who's going to be like, oh, it's a patriotic donation. He doesn't care, right? These politicians that talk about, oh, you should just take it in the whatever region, they're not going to care. You know who's going to care? You're going to be the ones paying for them, not them. So you are being screwed by the incompetency of your own leaders. It's not Putin, it's not his fault. It's those who sanction. This is why, for example, my country, Turkey, we're not sanctioning them because we're not stupid, right? We're not stupid. We're not moralizers. We understand that we have needs. And in fact, what is going on in Ukraine, even if you disagree with Russia, what is going on in Ukraine in terms of diplomatic grounds is easily justifiable. It's a reason for action that in history has precedence. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, you 100% have to acknowledge that before even entering into this conversation. What am I referring to? 8 years of Russians in Donbass being killed? NATO expansionism? Hello? What do you expect them to do? Nothing? I mean, you can't be that naive. Sorry for kind of like hogging the stream, but you can hog it as well.
No, yeah, I mean, the economic angle is going to be what ultimately, like, it's fun to marvel and soy face about, fake stories from the Ukraine and everything, but when you start paying $6, $7, $8 a gallon for gas, And then when, I've already seen people complaining that their favorite vodka isn't on the shelves. That's kind of a joke one, but like when that stuff starts to happen, it's like, oh, was it really was this worth like posting about Iron Man? Like, not really. And ultimately, like even more than America, like Turkey said they didn't sanction. There's obvious reasons for that, just basic, they're having their own economic problems. If you're going to pile more onto that, that's just going to make it ridiculous. And Turkey's right next to Russia. Like, think how Germany is going to suffer from this. America at least is huge. We have some of our own oil reserves. We can negotiate and bully other countries into giving stuff to us. But Germany, right next to Russia, I don't even want to know how much of their wheat they get from Russia, let alone the fact that they're not doing Nord Stream 2, the pipeline anymore. Like, they're in for a cold winter. And I mean, winter's almost over, but they're in, like, there's parts of Germany that aren't going to get warm till April, and it's going to be cold. And those are the kinds of things that, but at the same time, like all these countries are presenting this face that the whole world is united against Russia. And that's really not true. If you look at a map of who's doing the sanctions, it's the US and Canada, like 90% of the EU, most of NATO, not all of NATO, most of NATO, then Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and then like one or two other countries that the US totally controls. Almost all of Africa, most of the Middle East, obviously China, India, Pakistan, the former Soviet republics, Mexico, South America. None of these places are doing these sanctions. None of these places are punishing their people for, like you said, is a military operation with precedent, regardless of your opinion. Most of these leaders who are struggling to keep power in their own countries are not thinking, how can I make gas and food prices higher due to a military conflict thousands of miles away from me? And at the end of the day, like it kind of, I think ultimately this is setting the stage in these countries that have implemented these sanctions. What that is indicative of is which countries are the most controlled by globalist institutions, because ultimately it's not just about punishing your people, and it's not just about trying to send a message about Russia. All of these things are fitting into the Great Reset agenda, obviously. And we've already, just today, we're on Discord right now, but earlier it wouldn't have worked because, there's outages and, whether or not this is Russian attacks or not, like all of this stuff, and these, obviously the prices and fuel stuff's already being blamed on Russia, but when the cyber stuff starts to come down, when all of those things start to hit, it's going to be blamed on Russia, when in reality, it could easily just be from the people who are going to roll in the new system that will, protect us from that threat. And right now, in a certain sense, Russia is protecting themselves from that threat before it's like reactive before the reaction, because Russia has already said that, I think it's March 11th, all of their local, whether they're a business or someone with a website, you need to be on a .ru, domain, and there will effectively be a big, it'll be like China. It'll be like, Russia will become like China in regards to the internet. And China, of course, already has their huge internet infrastructure. They don't have open access to YouTube. Whether it's allowed, it's restricted, or it's just completely not allowed. And because China and Russia are now developing these huge relations because of these sanctions, and Russia is using the KIPS system with a bunch of their banks now that they've been kicked off of SWIFT. KIPS is just like the Chinese alternative to SWIFT. If you've got them and basically all of Asia besides Korea, South Korea, and Japan, like, sounds like they're in a better situation than all the people that are shooting themselves in the foot. And one of the other things is, I think there's a lot of posts about Putin being overthrown and a bunch of meme posts about Sergei Shoigu is going to do a coup against Putin, and there's protests everywhere. And like, of course there's going to be some protests in the cities. There's a lot of liberals in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but objectively speaking, Putin's popularity has skyrocketed in the midst of all of this. You can look at literally like polls that have been cited by like Masha Gessen and total subversive losers from the West who want to, who have like a heretical hatred of Russia from like their family history. Even they cite some of these sources that say that Putin's popularity went from 61 to 71% after the invasion started. And what that shows is that, and that has to go with the information war, is that the information war is entirely exterior to Russia. Within Russia, the information war has effectively already been won. And yeah, they've banned a lot of these Western outlets that were pushing a lot of the propaganda, which helps. But ultimately, within Russia, there's really no risk of some kind of regime change And the fact that they're trying to make that a believable idea with all of the like Netflix, Disney, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, when all of them are leaving these countries, in the American mind, it's like, oh my gosh, now that Russians can't watch, disgusting television and eat, literal garbage, then they're finally
No,
now
they
they're gonna
can't.
rise
They
up
can't
against-
eat seed oils anymore. No, they can't watch Euphoria anymore. No. Oh, but
No, I mean,
you know what's good about this stuff? No more Russians in my Dota games. Dota's gonna be great again.
no, exactly. I mean, we're taking a big loss in Russian shit posting. I think we're gonna have to get our VPNs up, get on Onion, and to see some content here because America, it's really not cutting it anymore. But like, I'm there's gonna be some frustration. Like, there's gonna be some growing pains in Russia. There's been people rushing to ATMs. There's gonna be people that are gonna be sad that they can't go to McDonald's. But at a fundamental level, we talked about this in the last episode with civilizational states. Putin, like you said, this was decided before. Putin would not have done this if he thought there was a chance he was going to get cooed. And he anticipated multinational American corporations pulling out. I think it's pretty obvious that he could have done that. And he made the tactical decision that he was confident that the Russian people would stand by the cultural, political, economic reasoning behind the decision, whether or not you think it was a good one, that they would stand behind that in the face of having their Reddit Coom devices, taken away from them. And a lot of people have talked about this. Scott Greer had a whole podcast just called like Reddit World Order. And that's just kind of what we're seeing the true assertion of the Reddit World Order from America. And everyone thinks in that mindset. Everyone is like totally Marvelized, totally Redicized. And the fact that Russia, like, and in 2 weeks, when Putin has not been cooed and when Zelensky is effectively giving him all of his demands, which I think will, maybe not all, but I think a lot. I think the independence of the Donbass, eventually integrated into Russia, demilitarized east of the Dnieper, that's going to be what happens. And all these Redditors are going to be like, hold on, you're telling me that he still has 70% support and no one can eat a Big Mac and no one can drink their cola and no one can watch the newest garbage Star Wars TV series? Like, yeah, that's how it's probably going to go down. And a lot of people are going to, I don't know if that means people are going to wake up and realize that, our leaders were screwing with us. I'm sure there will just be another cyber attack that'll rile people up again. But at the end of the day, people need to realize that this was calculated. The rest of the world isn't necessarily Reddit. And at the end of the day, the military situation on the ground, even if, regardless of the politics behind it, successful military operations win you popularity at home. And that's obviously what's happening right now. And if it was a total failure...
That's how Putin got popularity in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Which, of course, are now being employed in, like, a lot of people on the right-wing side of the internet are posting the Chechens and being like, look at this evil emperor is deploying, Muslim hordes on, Christian Europa. And, I mean, first of all, Caucasus people are, they are Caucasian, and it's their debate on whether they fit in the European identity is debatable. But what that means for Russia, which is still like an Orthodox country, what it means to have the people that they fought a bloody war against less than 20 years ago now like vociferously and like eagerly fighting for that same country that fought against them, that is a big testament to nation building, to politics, and to military geopolitics, and that to a people. And Putin has made it very clear that he addresses his people in historical context and has this realization that they understand their history. And when they see stuff like that, it builds confidence in Putin for the Russian.
And a lot of people don't really understand kind of like Russian history and kind of the mode in which the Russian nation has existed. First of all, you need to understand that, and this is an analysis Dr. Farrell made in God, History, Dialectic, which is a theological book, which you might say had nothing to do with it. But Russia, first of all, before Christianity, Russia wasn't really a thing, right? Russia was just a collection of different tribes. These were the Rus people, right? So they were basically Scandinavian people that were like following paganism and just like had their own settlements and kind of just like, trying to do things on their own. It's really with the Christianization of Russia, which, by the way, happened in Kiev, important detail, the Christianization and the long-term unification of the Russian peoples with the context of the situation that they're in. You need to realize that in the 13th century, you know who was in today's Russia? The Mongols. You know, they were the ones coming in, and then you had the successor states like the Golden Horde, for example. They had, you know, these countries were very much close to Russia, and they were raiding Russian settlements. Even when Russia kind of started to become more like a empire. So Russian history and culture exists within the context of an empire, of a federation of nations, which houses, of course, the Russian people are kind of like the main, you know, they're the main nation that is in charge, but they don't deny the fact that within their nation, within their empire, exists a multiplicity of different ethnicities in which they have, historically speaking, throughout, you know, and by the way, where did they get this political mindset from? They got it from the Roman Empire, the same Orthodox empire that in many regards, I'm not promoting Third Rome here, but in many regards is a succession of the Roman Empire. Ever since it fell in the 15th century, they are kind of a Russian version of it in many ways, because they employed the same politics. They recognized the different nations, and this is due to an Orthodox worldview. They recognized the distinctions of nations, but they also unified it. First of all, primarily they try to unify it by faith, and their missionary efforts was not like Roman Catholic missionary efforts where they were trying to genocide these different people and killing them. It was really spreading the faith, but also unifying them on the nationhood. And Chechens are, again, they're excellent example of this, of how to maintain a federation. I mean, you can maybe, you know, if you want to call it an empire or a federation, whatever you want Russia today. I mean, it's a federation, it's an empire, whatever. But the manner in which they really manage the different people in their country, as opposed to how America, for instance, manages it, where all of these different nations hate each other and they kill each other. I mean, it like doesn't that happen in Russia? Yeah, certainly, it probably does. But in America, it's way worse, right? But I thought America was the land of multiculturalism. I thought it was the land of, you know, tolerance, etc. Really, Russia doesn't even aim for that, and they yet still manage to establish some form of, at least, you know, I suppose, tolerance. I mean, these people do tolerate each other much better in the West. And the kind of like, you know, the political aspect of it from the nationalistic standpoint, the reason why it doesn't stand is because of the reasons I explained right now, is that Russia is a federational nation. It always has been. It always existed in that manner. It is in its culture. It kind of has an imperial history, right? It always has an imperial history. And there's also historical precedents for, like, for example, the Roman Empire, they used the Varangians when they were pagans against their, you know, sometimes against Orthodox countries like Bulgaria. You know what happened? In a couple of years, these pagan Varangians, they became Orthodox. I'm not saying are the Chechens will become Orthodox. I mean, there's a chance of that might really genuinely happen if you get more people like Father Daniel Sissev. Certainly, definitely, for sure. The possibility is there. The point that I'm making is that people need to go beyond this like basic baby levels. You know, X nation do this. I'm going to interpret this as some like the way I will interpret it in America. I mean, you have very different cultures, right, operating. And again, the system, the mode in which Russian politics operate, this is kind of why the West doesn't really understand what is going on. And in regards to economic stuff, just as a short note, because I hogged the time for speaking a bit too much, but I mean, Russia for a couple of months has already been trying to get back to the gold standard, right? They're kind of like trying to establish the gold standard. I mean, Coinbase recently banned Russian wallets, which is just very stupid. This is a reason why if you have crypto, never, you know, not your keys, not your wallets is the greatest example, okay? But having them on exchanges is like having your money in a bank, right? It's useless. They can use it anytime. They can take it anytime they want. This is why you have your own private wallet if you want to use it, right? This is another great example of it. But I just wanted to make the point about the Russian culture. Yeah.
Yeah, and that it's a good segue because the Chechen stuff, and that's how we got into that. Like that really highlights also the cultural aspect. And I'm not, please, no one accuse me of being some like right wing ecumenist here. I'm not saying anything like ecclesiological here, but we talked about in the last stream how, regardless of how sincere you think Putin is, or how, truly civilizational you think Xi is, or if he's just an opportunist, like fundamentally the multipolar future presents a larger place for illiberalism. And when you start to see which regimes chose to sanction and chose not to sanction Russia, and then how, like, for example, you could read Kadyrov has written all these posts, which some of them are hilarious and like clearly like meant to provoke reactions from Western countries. Like he banned all Japanese officials from all of Chechnya except the mental hospitals, and just like other like stuff like that. But like he's made this point that like because Russia has this Russian Orthodox heritage, they don't accept certain social ideals and certain like pervasive ideas that come from the West. And then you see that Turkey hasn't sanctioned, that India hasn't sanctioned, that Pakistan hasn't sanctioned, that Hungary hasn't sanctioned, even though historically Hungary has a lot of beef with Russia. And Azerbaijan obviously didn't sanction. And a lot of these countries, a lot of that has to do with economics and oil and energy, but a lot of it has to do with cultural stuff. Like someone like Orban is aware of the fact that if he's going to build all these multilateral relations with the West and be in NATO and be in the EU, that's going to bring institutions that support those organizations into his country. So he's clear. And then, of course, you have in France, you have Zemmour and Le Pen, who are both running to unseat Macron. Both of them have pledged to leave NATO if they're elected. And you even see in America, like the only people that are, I would say, on the right side of this and not putting the Ukrainian flag in their profile picture are like a relatively small percent, not small, but like a non-plurality of the conservative or you might even say anti-establishment wing of the American politic. And because of that, like it makes it easier for the economic connections to form when that cultural root is there. And again, I'm not here to, I think we've made it clear that we're not just here to like shill for Putin and everything. And I'll even critique the Russians because I think that this could have been handled a little bit better if, frankly, they had just recognized, if they had just done a Crimea in the DPR and LPR 8 years ago. Like, frankly, that was back when the Ukrainian army supposedly had 5,000 active troops. Nothing would have happened. Like, there might have been some strikes and some, artillery warfare, but it definitely would have been something like this. And then maybe with that influence, they could have, but ultimately, Putin was using those as leverage. And so we know that there's a lot of politics here. It's not entirely righteous, indignation on both sides. But ultimately, that cultural aspect, of course, it played in the Ukraine with the language stuff and with the persecution of the church, and then seeing with the sanctions regime, it's also shaping out kind of on these multipolar lines.
Yeah, and we can also point out some negative aspects of the multipolar, like the alternative China and Russia to, especially what China brings. To be honest, at the moment, China and Russia are, kind of getting good with each other. But one of the aspects of the illiberal societies, like North Korea, right? The only church, like the Christian organization that exists in North Korea is the Orthodox Church. And there's only like one in North Korea. That is obviously because Russia and North Korea, are diplomatically, with relation to the United States and how it handles diplomacy, are on the same page. But the problem with these societies is that there's going to be you are under the control of these governments. These governments, if they say something, they're actually going to do it, which is the opposite of the West, where they say something but they don't even do it, right? Like if Chi tomorrow, if he woke up from the wrong side of his bed, he could start persecuting for no good reason. He could start persecuting Christians, for actual Christian believers. There's that like possibility always existing there. So that's a feature of that new world order, which is fundamentally, in my opinion, I think what characterizes it is kind of like a secular pragmatism, whereas in the West, it's like secular idealism, where they have all of these ideals like human rights and all of these different beliefs that they have and principles, so-called principles that they try to operate, but these principles are actually in reality poison. Whereas in the East, they kind of like they don't they don't use the trick. They just say, what's good for my country, what I think is good for my country is what I'm going to do, which might, it is very much dependent on having good leaders, right? So
Yeah, and
even
I think that's a really good point, because people talk people talk about that Putin was removed from the WEF website and that clearly he's on the outs with people like Klaus Schwab and whatnot. But I think people need to recognize that while there is an ideological component and a spiritual component, and I do genuinely believe that Russia is historically been targeted in no small part because its population and its people do have a small core of true Orthodox believers. I do think that there's a spiritual aspect to this, but at the end of the day, what you need to recognize with this globalist imperium is that even though it is at its core about pushing an agenda, it's also, before you can get to that point, they have to secure strategic institutions and governments within these other places. So like, for many people, it might not seem like Orban is on the outs with the WEF because he went so hard with vaccines in his country. But just because he made that decision that the WEF would support doesn't mean that he could have just come to that decision on his own that happened to align with them. The WEF will, and these organizations, RAND, Open Society, all of these places, they need, even if someone's doing what it looks like, if they know deep down that there's no mechanism for them to control them if they go off the rails, they're still going to target them. It's why Putin wasn't let into NATO in 2000, because look, we could let this guy in and it would look great and maybe he'd do what we want, but we just don't have enough people on the inside and enough assurance from him that we have total control. And it's the same, and that's kind of what we're seeing in a lot of these countries. Like the sanctions regime on vaccines and on other global issues, it's not an exact lineup, but it's more exact of a lineup with which countries have a little bit more sovereignty over themselves than perhaps the Anglo-Atlantic establishment, which people don't really think about. Like that's a conversation where you really do need to separate the ideology and the actual actions of the government and then look behind the control mechanism.
Yeah, and an excellent example. I think this is one of the reasons why Russia is not really hot with China is because Asian civilizations have been what people term very collectivistic, where they kind of just destroyed, like the idea of the individual doesn't even matter. This is like in Japan, for example, the Bushido culture, right? The samurai culture is very much like it's all about destroying the individual and trying to like flow with the collective, right? Which without the individual, you can never get the collective. Without the collective, you can never get the individual. Christian societies, and Western society in general, but really Christian societies try to balance that, right? Especially Orthodox Christian societies. And we see this kind of collectivist attitude from Putin in comparison to the West. But for example, in comparison to China, Putin will be very, like, in comparison, right? He will be seen as individualist, right? I mean, it sounds kind of crazy to say that, but in relation, certainly yes, because China, I mean, the concept of citizenship, the concept of an individual citizen, is a kind of a European idea. It's like a European Christian idea. You can even say it's a Middle Eastern idea too. The Middle Easterners also had this kind of like an idea. The Far East does not have such an idea. Absolutely not. They never had this concept in their civilization. And Japan and South Korea, this is why they're kind of struggling with it, because they're trying to understand like what it means, but they're like taking the extreme approach where like, and like they're trying to understand, okay, how do we make sense with embracing the individual without losing the collective? It seems like it's impossible, but Christian societies have in fact mastered the art of accomplishing that really for 2 millennia. And this is also another thing to think about with relation to China and kind of like how Russia looks at China, how China looks at Russia. There is really inherently like Christian kind of like an idea in Russia fundamentally. I mean, it's obviously there's in their history that China kind of just cannot understand, and they don't want to kind of like, so they kind of like, if we get too much into their ideas, who knows what's going to happen to us, right? because they're also pretty kind of like culturally isolationist people. I mean, if you look at Chinese people when they go to universities in America, you know, most of them kind of like keep it to themselves, right? I mean, it's ingrained in their culture. And like, for example, you know, even Turks who are kind of like isolated as well, even they're kind of like willing to like kind of like be expressive, you know, whereas the, you know, these, you know, the Chinese, etc., they're not willing to, because it's kind of like part of their identity. So there's also a lot of like civilizational aspect that a lot of people, including the leaders themselves, don't even consciously think. It's just the manner in which they think and the manner in which they act, geopolitically and politically speaking. And this is something that you
Exactly.
can never really understand if you analyze this from an atheistic perspective. If you're an atheist, you're just going to think of all of these things as, oh, it's just environment. It's just like they had to do it, and so that's why they do it. No, you know, you can never explain these attitudes just by, oh, the shape of the earth influences how these people think. You know, that's a claim that you can really never really prove, right? But they try to prove that with empirical data, etc. Really, the empirical data is just confirmation bias. These are things that you can really only have with a actual proper, you know, believe it or not, religious worldviews. You need to have a religious understanding in order to be able to analyze and understand these different cultures. And the great irony is that you can be an Orthodox Christian and understand that, you know, the Chinese mindset better than an atheist can understand the Chinese mindset, because you're still operating under that, like, you know, like that layer, which the atheist completely rejects that layer. But the rejection of that layer completely destroys any analysis of geopolitics and really any analysis of anything in reality, because it's a fundamental denial of reality itself. Because, you
Well,
know,
people
if you deny what is behind reality, well, what is behind reality is meta reality or metaphysics. If you deny metaphysics, you deny physics. The meta is what holds the physics. You don't understand this, but yeah, go on.
but
Just
no,
so.
it's and like people like I mean, you can take this into the presuppositional argument and how people who are materialists, like I don't even think you can properly talk about anything in the realm of ideas, but people need to look like people always look, whether it's one individual conflict between two countries or like a big global conflict, like people always like they focus in on one angle, like, oh well, I'm going to look at this only from the perspective of Russia as a Christian country and then them this, and then therefore Russia doesn't meet this standard, so I'm now going to think they're terrible. Or China and Russia are both anti-liberal, so they're going to become best friends. Like it's this, you have to just get rid of these dialectics, because that's exactly how you just fool yourself and end up, and honestly, it's how you get to the marvelization Reddit tier. But the fundamentally, like, you can look at all of these things from a immediate economic or geopolitical perspective, from a civilizational perspective, from a religious perspective, and then even from a like broad standing kind of conspiratorial, like one world government, like behind the scenes financial interest perspective. All of those things have valid inputs into how countries interact. Like people always accuse Putin of being a big Zionist because despite the fact that his allies are oppressed by the state of Israel, he still has close relationships with them. However, like that's going to change. I could see that changing, not because of some weird ideological shift, like someone finally like got Putin on the line with the Palestinian Authority. No, like in reality, like in the sanctions regime, Iran, Syria, and China have been getting closer to Russia. So then that's how you could see relations with a country like Israel start to weaken. Like, and that doesn't mean that like perhaps those more ideological or spiritual elements aren't happening, but that wasn't the catalyst for them, and that wasn't even the reasoning of the people that did stuff. And people like we talked about prophecies on the last show and the question of the church and where it plays into it. The Orthodox Church has been kind of focused on Ukraine since 2016, and because of all of that, like people are very quick to say like, well, like here's evidence that all the sides are bad, and so therefore like the church is also this compromised institution, or the church is getting caught up in this, or the Russian, like, you just need to read the Old Testament and you just need to read the history of the church, because you don't think that people in ancient Israel had all sorts of political machinations about Babylon, about King Nebuchadnezzar, and about what was going on, what political system. And, we had these judges, now we have these kings, and then we had Saul. And like, I can only imagine how complex the politics was, especially when you had the temple worship and you had the sacrifice. Like, it was probably insane with the confluence of politics and religion. And ultimately, people listening to this, if you take anything from this, you can almost never put in enough work to take your mind out of the modern post-war, post-secular ethic, because that is how television and the media and our schooling system has taught us to think. And when you and that's part of this realignment, is this global realignment we are seeing, whether you think it's good, whether you think the other side of the multipolar conflict are good, bad, dangerous, forming something scary, regardless of what you think, it is creating space and bringing back this idea that there are these innate civilizational tendencies that people have, like in China and Japan, towards collectivism. There are these deep religious fundamental, like, religion is fundamentally something that is important to statehood, however much, people in America and, inclusive populists might think religion is, we don't need to talk about religion anymore. Like, as the multipolar world expands, those things are only going to become more relevant. And this idea that we can approach every political and social and economic problem just by getting the experts and running the numbers, like, that's gone. Like, that's fundamentally one of the biggest things that we got to say goodbye to, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. And it's really not that big of a surprise. I mean, again, Russia being an illiberal society today, I mean, it does a better job at managing these different religious and national factions better than most countries in the West could. And a lot of these people kind of say that, when it's Russia, that's a sign of weakness. When it's the West, that's a sign of strength, right? I mean, Mr. Big Spence, right, or best friend Big Spence, who's a total, absolute NATO shill, and who's a degenerate, disgusting, things that I cannot say. He's a very nice person too, but isn't it crazy that this guy Big Spence is totally in line with everything that WEF is pushing, everything that the liberal world order, whatever you want to call it, the Anglo-Zionist establishment, whatever you want to call it, he's totally in line with these groups, and that's where I'm kind of want to get into. There's two things I want to get into. Let's get into kind of like the crazy aspect, right? Like, let's talk about the 4-letter special boys, right? With the sun that is quite dark and has many tentacles,
the spinny wheel
the
boys.
funny wheel, those people, the 4-letter organization. Well, actually, I mean, the name is kind of like based on a city's Azov, but so what's really interesting about them, and I plan to make a video on the denazification, but what's really interesting about this group is a lot of people, especially in the West, the normies, they're saying, well, okay, yeah, they're extremists, but every country has extremists, right? Why are you focusing on these guys? 2 reasons. Number one, anyone who was woke, since 2014, knew exactly who these people were. Okay, knew who funded them. Guess what? It's their ideological enemy that's funding them. They knew who they stood for, and they also knew, and they were there when they realized that Ukraine incorporated them into the National Guard. These people are, officially speaking, they're an official part of the Ukrainian government. They're the only country that allows that kind of stuff. Like, maybe not the only country in the world, but only country definitely in Europe that allows that kind of stuff. And no one will ever guess that these people are being defended by those who were. I mean, these people were so scared by the what do you call them? The little tiki march, right? Like, bunch of men in suits. Oh, let's walk in straight line and have something happen.
Biden's campaign announcement was Charlottesville. Like, that was how he started his campaign, was being afraid of Charlottesville. Yeah. And people talk about, like, Azov is irrelevant. You're bringing this up. It's propaganda. They're just one battalion. Like, first of all, there's more than one. There's Azov, there's Right Sector, there's all these other groups. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you've noticed, like, if you follow Reuters, if you follow all these pro-Ukrainian OSINT accounts, like, they post pictures of the Ukrainian army they're literally incapable of finding pictures of these people without spinning sun, black suns, and SS insignia. And look, I'm not going to get on my high horse and yell at somebody for that, like I think it's dumb. And I think the fact that you're funded by Zionists, yet you claim to be a national socialist, I think is people should scratch their heads at that. But this is one thing I really wanted to get into is one thing we don't know in the fog of war, just as we don't know the exact lines. Like I compare the ISP map and some of the Russian maps. Like we're never gonna. At no time do you know the exact location on these maps. We don't actually. The other thing we don't know is the current state of the Ukrainian regime at all. Like we don't know how much Zelensky and his apparatchiks have retained power, but what we do know is that clearly Azov and the nationalists have gained influence because they are the ones that want to stay and fight the most, and they're the ones that have the most interest in keeping the conflict going, not letting civilians leave, conscripting civilians into the forces. They're the ones that receive most of these weapon drops because they're the most kitted out and they're the most active on the ground. And because of that, I mean, I can't confirm what happened to him, but of the 5 people that were going to meet with the Russians in Belarus, after the first few rounds of negotiations, there was only 4. And there was reports that one of those negotiators was taken out by nationalist forces. And we saw a video of a Ukrainian member of parliament being tortured and, bullied tied up, blindfolded by Azov and by these groups because he, supposedly said he wanted the conflict to end. That was what he said, and they interpreted that as being pro-Russian. And so we have no idea. I mean, Zelensky supposedly posted a video of him in Ukraine not being afraid. Based on how many other pre-recorded and pre-taken photos we've seen, there's no way to verify whether or not that was real. I would personally put money on him being in Poland, but we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when's the last time he's been like making these? Where are the videos, Zelensky? We want to see you in Kiev. We want to see you somewhere in Ukraine. But I personally, maybe I'm just stupid, but I haven't seen him post anything for a long time. He's only been in buildings doing negotiations. I mean. But, like, sure, okay, but where is he in between, or where was he before, right? Ever since the Russians claimed that he was not in Kiev, he's been very absent, in fact. But
I mean, he in Lviv or far western Ukraine, and maybe still be. I don't see any hell. Maybe he's in Greece with his buddy Dumenko.
Yes.
Like maybe he's down and he left his flock like that fake bishop did, but. Genuinely, like that's the thing. Like that could also be a big part of the reason why Zelensky is speeding up his willingness to cooperate with the Russians. Because at first it was very clear he wanted to prolong the conflict because he's getting lionized in the Western media. People are talking about how big his balls supposedly are and how cool he is and all this stuff.
All these liberal women saying stuff like, every girl has a crush on Zelensky. Yeah, like. Of course you're going to have a crush on Zelensky because he's a liar and a manipulator. So, of course, you're going to love him because that's the type of man you love. Because that's the kind of man you love. Yeah, of course. Because all of the images they show to like how cool he is, those are old images from the year before. So, yeah.
And funny thing about those images is it's very odd. Like there was no reason for him to take all these images in a bulletproof vest, like in eastern Ukraine. But clearly, they kind of knew that these were going to be useful in the future. But the thing is, he initially wanted to prolong the conflict, maximize civilian casualties, increase atrocity propaganda. But with how quickly he started to want to negotiate, one, that's evidence that the Russian incursion is being successful on the ground. But the other evidence is that I think he's facing extreme pressure from within his own institutions, from within his own partisan apparatchiks, with being effectively cooed out by a more nationalist group. Because people forget that Zelensky, compared to Poroshenko and the people that came before him after Yanukovych was cooed out in the Maidan, Zelensky's a moderate compared to those people. And ultimately, he still totally revamped the bombings of the Donbass and everything, and basically caved to the wills of NATO, who have a hand in the nationalism there. But there are still groups of nationalists there that are so crazy that even NATO doesn't really want to always be broadcasting with them. And that those groups have gained power as the street fighting has increased. And Zelensky is clearly aware that he may be taken out. And the thing is, those groups have almost nothing to lose. If someone had an interest in taking out Zelensky, they could easily just blame it on the Russians. So, like, he's definitely getting, the walls are closing in on him, and I think he realizes that it'd be much better off to concede in the east
Yeah.
so that he can salvage something in the west.
And a detail about Azov is that between 2016 and 2018, they had Congress approved funding and training and arming from the U.S. government. So 2 years they have been trained and they have been funded by the U.S. government. In 2018, congressionally speaking, so unofficially, you never know, but officially speaking, that ban was restated. But there were still 2 years now. There was a ban on them, and then that ban lifted, and then they rebanned it. The excuse of them, we found out 2 years later. It took us 2 years to find out that these people were actually a little extreme for us. No, they knew from the start that they were extreme, but they use, and this is what ideologies are. They are weapons. The United States uses it as a weapon against you. What are ideologies useful for? Especially extreme ideologies are useful for making people insane and attracting insane people. You want to attract insane people because the moment you make the populace insane, you can make them do anything they want. Right now, that insanity is growing. You know what people are saying? Even the middle class people are starting to think, I can handle gas prices going up to, I don't know, infinity, as long as the big bad Putin, they're gonna take down the big bad Putin, big United States army,
Or a 380-pound Redditor thinking that it's like totally reasonable. It's like, yeah, I can go to Ukraine and pick up a rifle. Like, they'll take me. Like, maybe I have cerebral palsy, but like, what? Like,
I'll take them out.
It's this brain rot. And like, if you can fundamentally have someone like so separated from reality and all their media they consume, the world they live in is so sanitized.
You create their reality.
Yeah, and you watch PG-13 fight movies where there's like not that, like, look up some videos of cars that got blown up with people's, fat coming out of them. Like, that'll show you what it really looks like when people get blown up in war. It's not, Halo. But the like the fact that people have, like, under any normal circumstances, if you posted like thousands of photographs of Nazi insignia, people in America would be like, maybe we should stop supporting these people. But this just goes to show you the level of cognitive dissonance people are willing to accept when the regime controls every single method that you receive information by. And that can cause you to just completely contradict your own principles while thinking that you're standing by your principles. And I think that in the next few weeks, I have no idea. We don't do dates here. I'm not going to say when this thing's going to end. I'm not going to say how exactly it's going to happen. I think so far our analysis has proved pretty prescient. I think if you just pay attention and listen and avoid blatant propaganda, you can filter through and make accurate assumptions about what's going to happen. But on the ground right now, Mariupol is probably the only place that the Russians faced like what you might call stiffer resistance than they anticipated. We know it's 100% verified.
And that's where Azov is. That's their headquarters.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the nationalist headquarters, and like the other groups have all just surrounded Kiev. Like, those are the two places that are like somewhat, like Kharkov. It's over. Like, Odessa would probably fall if the Russians decided to start hitting it from the sea. Like, I don't think it would be as difficult even as some of these other places. But in the end, like, we're going to see concessions given. And like Luhansk, for example, what people need to remember is that through the war, like, only about half of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts were occupied by the LPR and the DPR. But now those forces have basically claimed all of their de jure claims from before, which is like the entire administrative zone of Luhansk region. Luhansk is now entirely under control of the LPR. Donetsk is probably like 85-90% under control of the DPR. And when that happens, like, as in, like, there's not even a front line anymore. Like, there's extensive separation between them and the front line. When that happens, that's already like almost 50% of the on the ground goal of this operation achieved.
And by looking at the actions of, like, you don't look at the news media, look at the decisions made by the countries themselves. So, for example, is there probably an argument somewhere that Russia did struggle more than they expected? Yes, that's why they ramped up their military forces, right? It was only like 10%, right? Like, so they ramped up. So that means either they want to do that in the future, or that means they're kind of responding to what's going on, right? So that's, for example, something you can use. Or again, logic once more. If these independence forces are gaining ground without additional Russian troops to help them, that means something, right? And this was already happening, especially with the bombardment of these military bases of Ukraine, etc., where the logistics of Ukraine were totally like hit, right? And these independence forces, again, independently gained ground. They were succeeding more and more and more. I mean, that's a sign of something. That's something you can use in order to understand. You don't need some idiot in the media telling you this is how it's going. No, you can just use your own brain and get information from what's actually happening by the decisions taken by the countries themselves. Another example, when Zelensky is I'm the big boss and we're going to defend Ukraine, and then when he's starting to say, we can compromise, right? Yeah, when he's starting to use that kind of a language again, that's an indication of where it is going. This is why, like, we are saying that Russia is winning right now. It's not because of some we hope it's literally like the presidents themselves, the countries themselves, they are saying this. Like, they are actually saying this. You don't need the media to know what they're saying. Zelensky is saying this. He's openly saying this. Just read between the lines, or read between the lines of the actions that are taken by both countries. If like Russia decided, yeah.
Go ahead. Finish up. Go ahead.
If like I was just gonna say, if like Russia, for example, like suddenly militarized even more, that will probably be a sign that either they are trying to do things very quickly, and it was planned. Or this means it's not going good for them. Maybe things are getting actually bad for Russia. Maybe it is getting a bit worse. So that's when you can kind of like turn the cock. It's these two scenarios. Which one is more likely? Again, media is not going to tell you which one is more likely. Truthfully, you kind of have to use your own brain to like determine that. And that's kind of what we are trying to tell you and promote. Is that don't be reliant on the media, but don't be reliant just on us either. Maybe there's something we might say that might not come to pass in the future, right? Because I'm in my early 20s. Like I'm not a freaking super high IQ genius expert, but I use my thinking that is not dependent on what these idiots tell me to think. That's the advantage that I have, and that's the advantage I'm trying to promote in my channel, really, and generally speaking, not only just geopolitically, but this is just what I wanted to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and me, I think the fact that we're good at using the internet and then Orthodox Christian helps in this analysis a lot. But at the end of the day, like when we saw that video, I think it was a few days ago, of Zelensky like obviously drunk at this press conference, that was a change. And I believe that was my memory. I might be misremembering the exact dates on this, but if I remember correctly, that was when it was basically guaranteed that DPR and LPR forces and then the southern and northern Russian forces had completely surrounded the majority of the eastern group of the Ukrainian army, which some claim were 40 to 60,000 troops, which is like the main fighting force and the most elite groups of the Ukrainian forces. And that was when they're surrounded in like the cauldron maneuver, as it's kind of called, where they surround you and they kind of cook you in this zone of artillery fire and ultimately like advancement. And when that happened, you saw the video of Zelensky drunk and everything, and then a few days later, like very quickly after that, we saw him caving on these negotiations. And we see that happening in other places. There's parts of Kiev that are finally starting to be surrounded and whatnot. But when all of this starts to go down, there's going to be extreme counter propaganda. Like even when like some ceasefire and some agreement and all sorts of Russian concessions are granted, that's going to be like, I wouldn't be surprised if that was when like the cyber polygon stuff maybe even started, because like even though most people, they aren't swayed by changes in the narrative, when the New York Times publishes a fake headline and then corrects it 3 days later, most people don't see the correction. So the narrative damage is already done, but enough people would still be like, wait a second, like there would still be enough, they would still need to do a bit of damage control. And ultimately, people also need to recognize that at a fundamental level, it's just not good for the West. Like Ukraine was fundamentally a Western puppet state. Like the only place you could say is maybe more of a Western puppet state than Ukraine was like Kosovo, which isn't even recognized as a country by the United Nations. So when you recognize that like we're seeing all this biolab stuff, I'm not an expert on that. I can't go into that extensively, but like it seems to be that like even in the US, like some people are on their back foot. Like Victoria Nuland is admitting stuff under oath to Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio we know is insane on all of this. But like and then another thing happened today was I think some Western people were like, Poland was talking about some plane stuff with Ukraine that would have led to a possible like no-fly zone situation, and the West was like, no. So I think ultimately the West is preparing for basically what of course in Russia is going to be called a total victory. And then and I'm interested to see how if the regime in the West, in the UK and the US in particular, will become more ideological. It's like, we remember when Hillary Clinton called Vladimir Putin the leader of the alt-right. And I don't know if they're going to bring that out. I don't know if they're going to be like, we must stand against like the multipolar menace, from like some kind of ideological or religious perspective. They may, but we know at the very least that they're gonna, the sanctions and the cyber attack stuff is coming. And I think that when this wraps up, and I don't know how long that's going to be, but when the concessions start to be granted, we're going to see what that's going to look like, because there's going to be less room for just, propagandizing people, and they need to bring it all together.
Yeah. As I said, I mean, the amount of supply that Russia controls in the global market in some of the really important hard assets is insane. Again, wheat production, natural gas, etc., and how like the prices of those even those that Russia only has a minor control of, even they're gonna have like a massive markup in price compared to like what you're gonna see. Okay.
And in case just one thing, in case anyone didn't see this, I don't know if we mentioned it at the beginning, like Russia announced, like the US announced they were going to stop the oil from Russia, which a lot of people didn't expect them to do. But in response to all of that, Russia just immediately said, all right, no more exports to a huge list of countries. Like Russia is not exporting the majority of its exports to what will ultimately be the US, the UK, Western Europe, Japan, Canada. But obviously nothing changes for China, India, Pakistan, Syria.
And those countries, they like it. They like it, like they'd like to have that. And like that's kind of the thing is that Russian economy, like in the terms of like pure GDP, like American economy needs a lot of different countries in order to sustain itself, because it's a service economy. And the thing about service economies is that you're never going to be self-sufficient. You're going to sell out your self-sufficiency in order to provide kind of like the entertainment goods, right? So in terms of like Netflix and all this kind of stuff, like those things form a very huge part of American economy. And they do provide a lot of income to the government and even to the people, sure. The problem is that when issues like this happen, you're not gonna, like, McDonald's is not gonna help you, okay? Like they're not gonna help your country. OnlyFans is not gonna help you, right? I mean, isn't it so insane that the only way to make it as a woman in a Western country, well, I mean, married is the real way to make it, but the only way to get financial freedom as a woman in a Western country is literally becoming a prostitute. I mean, that's basically what American economy has become. But all of these women, when things start to get real, you know what? They're gonna drop their feminism. They're already announcing it publicly. They're gonna drop their feminism and gonna become good housewives. They're gonna stay at their home, at their husbands, while their husbands fighting Ivan and Vladimir and whatever, right? And die. But that's basically kind of like the point that I'm making is that, like, if you look at like purely GDP, it's like you're gonna take, oh, America's so good, right? It's what GDP or GDP per capita shows to you is the state of the economy right now. But in a scenario like this, is that GDP gonna help you out? Again, when there's war, no one's gonna watch Netflix. No one's going to be on, no one's gonna have the time or desire energy. These are features of the world that is in peacetime. Russia doesn't need these things that America is banning during peacetime, but America needs the things that Russia is banning even during peacetime, like oil. Okay, so this is why these sanctions really hit the rest of the world more than it hits Russia, right? Because a lot of the essential things that you need in order to survive in Russia, they're still provided, right? So, like for example, Turkish economy in 2014, $1 equaled like two Turkish liras. Today, that's like 14 Turkish liras, right? Does that mean that people are dying in the streets? No. If you stay in Turkey, I mean, life is still, it's not good economically speaking, but it's not like Venezuela tier either, right? Like in Turkey, things are still good, like not good, but it's like okay, like it's manageable, right? And Russia is going to go through that as well. It's going to be manageable, people are going to have tough times, all of that kind of stuff. But America, right? The gas prices, it's going to hit them. It's going to, for some people in America, it's going to be beyond, like, manageable will be really good to like some areas of the United States. And that's kind of like the real problem that people don't really realize, is that this is why the value of like real assets for countries are beneficial, right? Because again, think of it. What sanctions? Adidas, Nike, right? Snapchat, OnlyFans, PRN Hub. These are peacetime consumption tools. In wartime, they're useless. Toilet paper is useful. They at least wash my bum. They don't even wash my bum. They're worthless during wartime. And when the world is moving to that, or that kind of like a conflict, it's going to be very clear who actually has the advantage. And again, for Russia, a lot of these things, like the 60-year-old Russian boomer is not going to care about like these sanctions. But, the 20-year-old Russian, he might care about this because, okay, his education futures is getting a bit, rocky and all this kind of stuff. But it's not really going to affect them in the long term as well, because they're already kind of prepared for this as a society. I mean, they're not fully westernized yet. And
people seem to recognize that like America is not like, this isn't like the best like point to make. Like you wouldn't say this to like a Russian person to convince them of anything, but like Russia's been through a lot, like there's people alive today. Obviously the people alive today remember the 90s, and that was pretty dang bad for Russia. Like it's probably not going to get anywhere close to that bad in Russia anytime soon. America, in my opinion, we're headed for something way worse than the 70s. And if it's way worse than the 70s, then no one alive today remembers how bad something that bad. So if it gets to a point where no one alive today remembers how bad it is, I'm not making any statements or endorsements of anything, but those are the conditions that are set for like real, like more tangible civil unrest. Like we know what civil unrest looks like in America now after the summer of Floyd, but like there is going to be like it's going to be different. Like it's going to be stuff that we haven't seen before, and stuff that people, especially my age, I'm the same age as you, I'm 23. Like no one's seen it this bad. Like no one's going to have seen gas prices this high. No one's going to have seen food prices this high. And then when like, look, and if Russia, like, I'm not going to say whether or not, like, there's a good chance Russia does launch actual cyber attacks on America. That's part of why they're closing off their website and stuff, like all their internet and stuff. Like when Facebook is down, when Twitter's down for 10 days, or when Uber Eats is down, or when all this, like when those things go down, whether or not it's from our own people or the Russians, it won't matter. Then that either that's gonna create unrest, and then ultimately someone's gonna come in. Yeah, and that's how you get
minor point as well. America's a highway economy. It's they don't have America doesn't have public transports the way Europe has it, or even like Russia has it in comparison, right? So for example, me in Turkey, the gas price, like if you use public transports, the gas prices kind of are like okay, like it's like whatever, right? Like if you have a car, it's an issue, but in America you don't have, like, people don't use buses as much as it, and like it's such a huge country full of roads. I mean, look, I live in Texas. Like, you need
it's bigger than Germany. I live in Texas. It's bigger than Germany. We don't have any trains. We don't have the cities don't even have subway systems because the rock is too hard to dig. Like Texas, thankfully Texas has had historical, like we have one of the lowest gas prices in America because we make so much of our own. But look, it's going to be $4, I bet, in the next 3 days here, and that's insane. Like I'm seeing people in California seeing above 5, even 6, and stuff. Like it's gonna get really bad out there and in the Northeast. But in Texas and in some of these other states, like have the least infrastructure, it's going to get bad too. And like people like are like, thank goodness I work from home, because if I didn't, it would be insane. Like I drive, 12 miles to church. It's all, I could already feel how bad it's getting. Like it's gonna be a real noticeable problem for people. And people talk about like, well, it's over for Biden. Like, yeah, it probably is over for Biden. Like, I don't know how much we want to talk about like elections and stuff, but like he is becoming more and more like, there's been a bump because of the Ukraine propaganda, but in the long term, I don't think it holds, and I have no idea how quickly the, what you might call the globalist it's the classic, problem arises, power comes in to solve the problem, makes suddenly you have a much bigger problem. And I don't know how quickly that's going to happen, but it is going to happen. And people need to be, this is a moot point for almost anyone listening to this, but people need to be, getting out of the stuff, holding your stuff in dollars in the bank, get land, get harder assets, secure a food supply, because this is only going to become a more, this stage has now been, as we talked about with World War III, the stage has now been set for all sorts of possibilities that weren't necessarily on the horizon before. And now that they've been set, who knows where it could go. Like we've entered from a geopolitical perspective, we've entered a pre-World War I kind of zone. And I'm not saying that it'll look a lot like World War I, because, we don't live in the early 20th century anymore, but we're entering a place where there's all sorts of tinder and places that can set on fire really easily. And now someone can throw a match and they're a lot closer than they were before. And there's all sorts of different fires that could start.
Yeah. I think my microphone sounds fine. Yeah. And I can't I kind of like repeating myself over time, but like for America, I mean, I really can't imagine, like, you guys are going to suffer a lot due to these, like, because again, if you had this in Europe, like, Europe will suffer too, but again, like the public transport part, like I'm not even like shilling for it. It's just basic truth. Like if you have a good public transport system, you will mitigate the damage. You know how America is trying to mitigate the damage? I'm not kidding. Buy electric cars, dude. Go just buy Tesla, right? It's absolutely insane. So I'm gonna have to sell my car and buy an electric car, like, which is, by the way, electric cars are worse for the environment. If you have seen the lithium mines, right? They are, in terms of comfort and use, they're way, 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 way worse than actual cars. The electrical system, so to speak, it's just not there. Like, even hybrids are like not that super good, right? It's like even hybrids are kind of like, they're just, it's trying to mitigate the gas usage. It's not mitigating, like, it's not trying to, like, it's not good because it's hybrid. It's good because it like helps the, like, optimization and efficiency of the gas usage. I mean, if you know what I mean. So I mean, if, in America especially, it is such a big country where like everything is so far away from it. This is why a lot of these problems, like, again, like, we can talk about Europe facing these problems. America is different because America is fundamentally built in the modern age. It is a modern age country. What I mean by modern age country, a modern age country, an ancient country, an ancient nation, everything is closer, right? So for example, I'm in Norway, right? I'm in Oslo. Everything, I could just walk and I'm there, right? If I need to drive, I just drive for like 5 minutes. For what I need, I'm there, I got it. I can go back home. I can even walk back home. Everything is within walking system. The place that I lived in while I was living in Norway as a child, in the city, everything that I needed for myself was like, just walk there. School, walk there. The shopping center, right? The Torg, walk there, right? The doctor, walk there. Everything, walking distance. In America, nothing is walking distance because everything is based on using your car, because it's in the economic, I think I will say, in the economic system of America, in the modern world, that is how it is best optimized, right? Economically speaking. But
yeah, I mean, America became a nation because after the Second World War, Eisenhower federalized and did the whole U.S. highway project. Like that's what fun. Like, sure, the railroads got people to the West Coast, but fundamentally the highway system was what actually was like the final nail in the
Yes.
coffin of like American unity and the creation of the American nation.
Yes.
And the only thing with Germany is that I'm interested how Nord Stream 2 is going to come back into this, because like these European countries, well, like, yeah, it's going to be a lot less, like there's less people that have to pay for gas. The problem is they make less energy per capita than America. So
Hmm.
like places like France have been smarter. They have nuclear and stuff, but like Germany, like they phased out a lot of their natural, like
Yeah.
a lot of their fossil fuels and stuff. Like the Germans didn't want to go this hard on the Russians anyway. They wanted to keep Nord Stream 2. Like it might come back on the table. Like, and if that gets back on the table, then the Russians have miles to run, because if it comes back on the table, it's entirely out of like necessity, because you know the Americans are on the phone every day with the German chancellor saying like, we'll do this for you, we'll do that for you, we'll do everything, like, you know, like how much they're trying to help them out but not get that dang pipeline back.
Yeah.
And you're on that show with Jay, you talked about like the pipeline with Azerbaijan, you know, like there's all
Hmm.
sorts of energy implications for all of this. And that whole region, like we know the Middle East is the way it is, large parts because of the global energy monopoly that the US has. But like this is gonna affect the dollar, you know, like as like does OPEC have 5 years left, 10 years left? Like it might exist in some form, but I don't know if it's gonna be as globalized of a system. Like the petrodollar might, like now that we've got America trying to buy from
Hmm.
Iran and Venezuela, and then Russia refusing to send to like whatever countries it doesn't like, and all these sorts of things. And then on the account of all of this, now you've got, I think it was just yesterday, huge Israeli strikes on Syria and whatnot. Like, what is this gonna, like? Those are the kinds of things that can turn this into a broader conflict.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I know exactly where that's going to happen, but as America enters into, you know, Great Recession, Great Depression, economic
Yeah.
downturn, that kind of stuff, like, well, we know the Great Depression came before World War II, so
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Because it's
also,
influenced people and it made people crazier. Because I mean, the best way to make people insane is make them lose their livelihoods and go through that period, you know. And that's why like a lot of like when I was like into like politics, one of the things that I will kind of like a position I will hold is that I always argued that clean energy stuff was a total scam. And I think we're going to see why exactly clean energy was promoted. It's because it is a scam. They want them to waste time on this stuff that doesn't work at all so that the actual solutions can be phased out until stuff like this happens. Because, well, you might say, why is it a scam? I mean, if you want the betterment for the environment, what you do is you optimize. So you optimize your technology to use less of the resources like gas in order to get more mileage. That's what you do in order to help the environment. When you're wasting your time with clean energy, you're not getting that. You're putting that workload away from what you actually need and you're putting it into a pet project, and this is what you get. You get something that's not going to feed anyone. You get something that's not economically feasible, and you spend less time, you spend more time away, and you economically de-incentivize working on actual solutions, and you make them spend time on stupid solutions by giving government subsidies, etc. All of this was absolutely, I think, intentional for this very purpose, so that this
well,
can
think about
happen.
how much think about how much anti-nuclear propaganda there is. Like even with all of this talk about people, Russians invading Chernobyl, Zaporozhye nuclear plant under attack, like the only reason those are even headlines is because people believe this stupid nonsense that like radiation lingers for 10 billion years, and if you stand in it for 5 minutes, you get a tumor in your face. Like none of that is true. Like the way we understand radiation today is entirely propaganda against the proliferation of nuclear energy. And I'm not some huge nuclear shill. Frankly, I think we should all just stop using so much dang electricity anyway, not from like an environmental anti-human perspective just to like help your soul. But at the same time, like if all these people in America were really cared so much about the environment, they'd be a little bit more pro-nuclear, which anyone can say that. That's not a groundbreaking point. But you're completely right. Like
Mhm.
this, you can't just like, if they just went through and blew up coal plants and then shut everything off, everyone would be like, all right, what the heck, we're like having a revolution. But when they give you all these fake solutions and then politicize it and then also use it as a vehicle for a transhumanist agenda, then when it all fails, it's a lot more believable when you just blame it on the Russians or you blame it on whatever, as opposed to the fact that this has clearly been orchestrated. It's been pulled from 30 different sides for the past 40 years on the energy stuff. And that now, like here in Texas, like we had, like last year, we had this huge freeze. People died in their houses. People froze to death because, and a big part of it was that stupidly, even though we have quote unquote conservative leadership here, we have this huge reliance on this wind power. And if you drive through North Texas, East Texas, West Texas, you'll see these huge wind farms. And guess what? They freeze and stop. And when there's no wind, they don't make power. And so when they freeze, and then when we don't have enough natural gas and coal because of all sorts of nonsense policy, then you get like total society collapse. Like Texas was like shut down, like not just shut, like you couldn't leave your house, and your house might not have had food or power or water. Like it was literally like an apocalypse level scenario. And that was last year. Now that we're seeing all this stuff with Russia and everything in the future, like, and that was in Texas. What happens when that same exact thing happens in Minnesota? Like, that's a lot of dead people. That's a lot of cold, dead people. And these are the kinds of situations that, like, people need to, like, I'm not trying to, like, rile anybody up, but, like, your government is willing to do that to you. And
well, your elites are, the people you watch on your YouTube shorts and TikToks and all of these celebrities, you know, they're not going to be the ones going through this. You are. Remember that, okay? You're going to be the one going through this. I mean, like, I can't even say anything about this because I don't think, like, you know, it's funny because, like, the happening posting, it's, like, kind of, like, exciting, you know, like, that kind of stuff. But it's, like, this is real. Like, many families, especially those who are on low income, are going to be so hit by this. It's tragic, and especially like for a very long time already in the global economy, wages, right, have been going down. They can't keep up with inflation. They can't keep up with everything else that is going on. I mean, you already have hyperinflation. The 25% of the existing money supply was printed like last year or something, right? I mean, the price of the commodities are already rising. Like really the real inflation for some of these assets, because really inflation is not something you can kind of just average. Like that's kind of how it doesn't work that way. It's something you understand by like commodity to commodity, right? So some commodities rose up by, like, I believe wood, like they went up by like 80% or something. Like it was like a freaking bull run of this stuff. The 30%, like that's what the inflation of some of these assets that are very important to use in order to go on with your life. The inflation of these are 20%, 30%. Those are the levels of it actually happening. What about the wages? Do they increase 20%, 30%? They don't, right? They don't do that on average. What does that mean? Economy is going, there's actual recession, but could anyone say there's a recession right now? Well, you know, until the war happened, probably most people wouldn't say it, right? Because, but the Nasdaq go up. You put your money in Nasdaq, you know what's going to happen? You're going to lose your money because it doesn't keep up with inflation. That's what's going to happen.
And like, think about how, like, you know, people are going to say that it's like, oh, well, this, like, people have made the point that, like, now you're not looking at COVID anymore because of this Russia situation, or now you're going to ignore the gas prices because they've gaslit you against Russia, and all these things that they're going to, you know, cover up with the Russia excuse, you know, with the our enemy, with the evil empire, with the Hitler too stuff. Like, that's like, some people see that and that's completely true. It's 100% real. They're going to use that as a boogeyman. They're going to justify all sorts of local domestic takeovers of institutions based on the supposed threat of, you know, Russian cyber attacks. But a lot of people hear that and are like, oh, therefore the conflict in Russia and Ukraine and the stuff on the ground doesn't matter. And that's where you kind of lose the plot. Because one, at a basic level, like, people are dying, you know, you want to pray for people on the ground, like, military stuff is serious. But the fact that we're seeing this level of mobilization with real combat is a very important thing in our time. It marks a really big shift. And then there's, of course, the church element to it. And then just because the geopolitical distraction stuff is true doesn't mean that the ideological underpinnings of this worldwide multipolar conflict aren't true. Like, just because there might be a party that is perhaps playing both sides for some kind of global benefit doesn't mean that there isn't still some truth to the way that it's breaking down. Because we know God is in control of all of this, so we know that there's powers and principalities of the air on both sides doing the bidding of their master, whether it's God or the evil one. And that's going to influence all of this. And we, of course, know there's black swan events, and you can never necessarily know which one is a black swan event and which one was orchestrated. But at a fundamental level, you need to have all of this grounded within your Christian faith, and then analyze all of it rationally in all of these different specters, and then kind of synthesize them into what you would equate as an understanding of it. And that's what I've at least done. I think that's what David tries to do. And you just got to be careful out there, because next thing you know, you could be, you could be supporting the person that's cool with you freezing to death in the winter.
And this is a coincidence, but not a coincidence really. I want to get into the kind of like the religious aspect of this issue too. I mean, I kind of plan to like make it the main thing, but there's just so many things to talk about in this conflict that it kind of just like went into many different directions. But one of the things that, for example, in the Ukraine situation, that's really important, and Orthodox Christians knew about like a lot of the things that we're building up to, right? Like especially those who are careful, especially since I will say 2017, 2018 especially. To those who don't know, what happened is that in the Ukraine, there's Metropolitan Onufri, who's the canonical primate who has jurisdiction over Ukraine. And the entire Orthodox world recognized him as the primate. Metropolitan Onufri is under the Moscow Patriarchate, right? So what existed in Ukraine during that time were a couple of schismatic groups. So you had Epiphany, you had
Filaret Denisenko.
Yeah, Filaret, yeah. I try to remember him. And like, one or two different groups as well. So what happened is that, first of all, by the way, and I'll look for the image of this as well, and I'll show it to you on the stream. But so, due to the political machinations of the United States, working in tandem with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, because the Ecumenical Patriarchate has a very, very friendly relationship with the United States, especially in particular with Joe Biden. Joe Biden himself is very public about this. I think he also said, there's now a Greek in the Oval Office, Joe Bidenopoulos, or something stupid like that. But let me try to find this image that I'm looking for. But the Ecumenical Patriarch and Joe Biden really, for a long time, had a kind of close relationship, and the reasoning behind this is actually quite simple. One only needs to look at the Ecumenical Patriarchate being in Turkey, and the Turkish government kind of like having this kind of a relationship with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, where the Ecumenical Patriarchate, its real source of influence in the Orthodox world is not going to be in Constantinople. I say this as someone who lives in Constantinople, by the way, so I'm on the ground witnessing this myself. It's going to be on the United States, right? Now, in order to be able to do what they're doing in the United States, these people are going to have a relationship with the United States. It doesn't matter how bad politics is. It's an integral part in being in society. I mean, if you're kind of blind to these things, even the most like the spiritual people will have some sort of things to do in geopolitics, unless they are monastics, right? The whole point of being a monastic is to escape away from these things. So if you don't want to be part of this, you don't be a bishop, you be a monastic, right? That's the kind of point of it. But if you're a bishop, you kind of have to be in these things. And one of the things that's going on is when the new Ukrainian church was established under Denisenko, under Epiphany Denisenko, one of the things that he did is thank U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Said, "Hey man, thank you for establishing our church," which they themselves admit that this schismatic church that is unfortunately recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarchate and Alexandria and Greece and Cyprus, some hierarchs from Greece and Cyprus, that is, this, they're trying to legitimize this whole thing in Ukraine, while there is from the get-go the legitimate primate Metropolitan Onufri, right? And again, this is due to American influences. America has before this war has already tried to influence the not only the political state of Ukraine, but also the spiritual state of Ukraine, and really, as a result, has been trying to influence the religious state of the entire Orthodox world. Now, the first thing I want to say as a kind of a disclaimer is that what does it mean that Ecumenical Patriarch recognizes Epiphany? Does that mean that he's an actual bishop? No. Well, let me give you an historical example. Until the 14th century, the Patriarch of Alexandria was in communion with the Pope. Does that mean that the Orthodox Church recognized the Pope as part of the Orthodox Church? Not necessarily. Why? Because just because you commemorate a schismatic hierarch or a heretical hierarch does not instantly legitimize that hierarch. The way they are recognizing, considered within the Orthodox Church, is the complete Orthodox body, right? And their recognition of it. So that's what's really important about it. Yeah.
There's examples of this even in modern times. Like, part of the reason there's splits in American Orthodoxy is that for a time, ROCOR, they were not in communion with the Ecumenical Patriarch, and they were in communion with Greek schismatic old calendarists, and that got sorted out in the 90s, and obviously with the reunion. But like, that doesn't mean that ROCOR was in schism. However, it also doesn't mean that the Greek old calendarists were legitimate. It was because of the exile from the Soviet Union and other stuff like that. It was an ecclesiastical situation of not of necessity, but of the mixed up situation going on at the time, and that's what we're in right now.
Yeah, and usually these issues are resolved over time. They are not resolved instantly, right? And that's what happened in the church all the time. There's been many times in the church where heretics and schismatics were commemorated by legitimate patriarchs. Did that mean that those legitimate patriarchs were instantly eliminated from the church? No. Does that mean that those who are illegitimate were suddenly counted to be in the church? Also no, right? So this is something, it's a progress of time. It's something that requires the whole church to speak on. And this is why this current situation is in the future going to be resolved through a synod. It's a matter of really when is it going to be resolved? Because in this current climate, the grounds for solving that is just not there. There needs to be grounds in solving this situation. Does this destroy Orthodox ecclesiology? As I said, as I pointed out, no, it didn't destroy it in the past. It's not going to destroy it today, right? So those who are like Roman Catholic or that mindset who want to like get into that, all I need to say is SSPX, okay? You have even worse situations regarding it, because you have the Pope and you have the SSPX, and they still have that kind of like a middle path of being recognized and not recognized, okay? That's absolute clownery. That doesn't happen even in Orthodoxy. Right.
Well, let's not let the Catholics off too easy in this conflict. I wanted to get into this as well. Like, we can't, like, we talked about the Ukrainian nationalists and the fact that they're even maybe posing a coup threat to Zelensky. Like, guess who's a big part of the Ukrainian nationalist infrastructure? The OCU under schismatic defrocked Denisenko, and then the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the Uniates. Mm-hmm. And there's crazy amounts of, Azov and, far right, I don't say this is put like as a slur, but like unironic, like neo-Nazi support within certain Uniate parishes in the West. The OCU are the most nationalist group compared, like Ukrainian nationalists compared to perhaps the canonical church. And then on the ground at the start of this conflict, there were multiple churches burned, vandalized under the Moscow Patriarchate. And while at the same time, Epiphany Dumenko is in Greece hiding. Whereas Metropolitan Onufri is there and has opened all the churches to humanitarian aid, rings the bells when there are bomb threats for people to make it there. And we also know that the Russian forces are not targeting churches regardless of what denomination they are. So like those are going to be safer places. Yeah. And ultimately,
does that mean that they're never going to be hit?
No.
There's a possibility. Yeah, unfortunately. Does it mean that they're targeted? No.
And of course and we talk about the religious aspect of this, and I really do pray and hope that there's a synod that resolves this schism. We talked about how Russia did the exarchate in Africa, perhaps to have leverage against the schismatics to perhaps roll back the African exarchate if the EP rolls back its incursion into Kiev.
Ukraine, yeah.
But ultimately, I think there people have talked about the possibility of a 2025, a Jubilee Synod where Bartholomew and Pope Francis meet, and I'm not making any predictions on that. I pray there's no attempt at some kind of false union with heretics, but I don't see any, like, if something like that does happen, Ukraine will be one of the linchpins of that, because we've already seen concelebration between the schismatics and the Byzantine Catholics. And the fact that that exists there, the fact that there's shared ideology and stuff, and the fact that there's a lot of Ukrainians in America, like the biggest Ukrainian diasporas and many outside of Europe and stuff are in America and Canada and then Brazil. And these places are much more Catholic dominated and just, American empire dominated than, the West. And so, and then of course we have all of the Catholics talking like Taylor Marshall, like consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart now. It's like, there's all sorts of Catholics that, in my opinion, would be on the right side of this, would be clear-headed about this, but ultimately are blinded by this Fatima nonsense and this, kind of what I call an orchestrated kind of religious angle to approach Russia that will always have them on the side.
Make no mistake, both Francis and the so-called traditionalists are on the same side as NATO and the liberal New World Order on this issue. They're both on the same side. The only religious party that is on the side of truth, justice in Ukraine and in Russia too, by the way, on this geopolitical issue that is relevant, right, in Ukraine and Russia, is the Orthodox Church. That's the only party that actually has truth on the side. That is actually against this New World Order. You just need to look at Patriarch Kirill's statements on Forgiveness Sunday to see exactly what I'm talking about. This is for the tract, right? You will never get a speech like that from a Roman Catholic bishop or a pope. They will never have actual both spiritual and geopolitical wisdom in any speech that they ever make. It's always going to be these very highly political, vague, lame speeches that are worth nothing. But on the topic of Roman Catholics in Ukraine, we need to also look no further than Joseph Kontsevich, who was in the region of Ukraine, right? After the Union of Brest, who massacred and murdered Orthodox Christians in cold blood, and he was hated even by the Roman Catholic Grand Chancellor of Poland, who was speaking for the king, who said, the persecution that you're getting, that's not even persecution, buddy. You deserve what you're getting because you're a murderer, you cut people's heads off, you drowned them, you are a monster, right? Even the government itself disassociated from this absolute monster. But Marco Rubio, what does he do? He says, let's intercede for, let's ask intercessions from Joseph Kontsevich, the guy who murdered Russians, the guy who murdered Russian Orthodox. Isn't that interesting? What about the Immaculate Heart of Mary and this nonsense Fatima prophecy? Let's just pray for the Pope to do his Tekken combo on Ukraine, do the hyper beam on Russia, and then Russia will become like 100% Roman Catholic. That's literally what these people believe. I mean, what an insane... I mean, we talk about prophecies in this channel and religious stuff, but this is just insane superstitious stuff. Do these people not realize what they're actually promoting? They're really promoting, in a religious sense, the liberal world order. That's what they're promoting with these kinds of nonsense prophecies.
And there's that Marco Rubio thing is just very telling that in the midst of all the politics and everything, there's still a very direct spiritual application here, and in even historical context of church history. That's still church history is still being written today, and in 300 years, if we're still here, which I don't even know if I think we will be anymore, but if we are still here, then this will be written in it, and there will be church history on this. And people can't overlook that. And again, I'm not a huge Russophile. I could critique Putin on the issue in Ukraine all sorts of ways, but we can't ignore the historical kind of hatred of Russians and the Russian people that have been fomented, especially in the Western media sphere. You have Russians being kicked out of operas, Russian composers being asked their political opinions and then fired, Russian students being sent home, Rokor churches vandalized in New Zealand and England and all sorts of places. This is gonna, and I made this point, I was talking to someone in real life earlier. When religious persecution and persecution of Christians comes in the future, it's not going to be under some big label of here we come, persecuting Christians, get ready to deny, we're going to force you to deny Christ with a gun to your head. That's never going to happen. That'd be pretty easy. That'd be nice, wouldn't it, if it was that easy to recognize? But no, it's going to be pernicious. They're going to use politics. They're going to do all sorts of stuff to divide people
It's
and
going
make them
to
act
it's going
like,
to look so innocent.
yeah, they're gonna be like, this isn't religious. You're a hyper religious, superstitious nationalist who can't separate religion from politics because you believe this is a persecution. Like, that's what you're gonna hear. Like, when stuff really starts hitting the fan, be prepared for those accusations. Be prepared for bishops to say that kind of stuff. Don't be prepared. Don't expect the entire power structure of the church and your community to
Allow this
all like,
woman to marry her horse right now in your church, or we will, close it. That's
yeah,
basically what's going to
yeah.
happen.
Yeah, like there's going to be all sorts of stuff that like will slowly but like the attack won't really come until they believe they've seeded division within the minds of people to where they think they can accomplish it.
Yeah, and a brief note I want to make on like the Patriarch Bartholomew stuff and how he's seen. Some people say, oh, well, there's different sense of the word schismatic, right? So, for example, if you're recognizing or establishing another jurisdiction when there's already a legitimate jurisdiction, that's a schismatic act. But does that mean that you're schismatic in the sense that, for example, you're a TO or you're a Roman Catholic? Not necessarily, right? So there's a distinction between the act itself and like the state of the jurisdiction itself. So calling Constantinople schismatic, like Russia doesn't even think in that manner. So they like Russia, for example, let's say like someone was baptized during the schism in Ukraine in the ecumenical patriarchate, and then he went to a Russian church. Will that person be chrismated again? No, right? Like, so that means there's a recognition of sacraments, right? Recognition of sacraments means you are the church. I mean, that's really basic, right? This is why in our ecclesiology we don't recognize the sacraments of heretics and schismatics. So we don't recognize the sacraments of Roman Catholics and monophysites. We don't recognize the sacraments. We recognize the sacraments of those who are in the church. So if Russia and Constantinople has a schism, but they recognize each other's sacraments, guess what? That means they're still in the church. Another mode in understanding that, who are they in communion with? Let's say they're in communion with Georgia, they're in communion with Jerusalem. Well, or like, Bulgaria, Serbia, etc. Well, they are just not in communion with each other. But guess what? You're going to be surprised when you hear this. That has happened in church history all the time. One great example, Alexandria and Antioch were out of communion with each other between 431 and 433. You know over what? Antioch rejected the Third Ecumenical Council, dude. That's much bigger. That's a much bigger deal than this. That's like 10 times bigger. That's an ecumenical synod. That's a dogmatic pan-Orthodox synod that they're rejecting. And they schism. And you know why? You know what they did? They said Nestorius is Orthodox and he is the legitimate patriarch of Constantinople. Yeah, it's that serious. It's that big of a deal. There were people that recognized, even after Ephesus, Nestorius as the patriarch of Constantinople. But in 433, that was resolved between Alexandria and Antioch. Right? So that problem was resolved between the two jurisdictions. That's how these things go. And so a lot of these people who try to understand these things without reading church history sound very stupid when they say some of these things. And it's just very inaccurate.
Well, and this is a good segue into this. Like, the issue in Ukraine is serious. It has big consequences. There's big players involved. The fact that it's the ecumenical patriarch versus the largest patriarchate is a big deal and everything, but ultimately the mechanisms are always going to exist to resolve this. I'm sure I do genuinely believe this is going to get resolved. The main issue that is a little bit less easy to ecclesiastically solve is what the schism will be used for, which ultimately I think will be communion with heretics, acceptance of like heresy into the church. Like, that's the bigger danger that people aren't necessarily aware of. Like, the influence of I'm not saying anything about Go Arch not having valid sacraments, but like the influence of Go Arch and the fact that someone like Elpidophoros is next in line at the ecumenical patriarchate level, and that like the schismatics in Ukraine made statements saying that they will accept LGBT stuff just because of their opposition to Russia, and the fact that the EP is using, like, that's the stuff that's more dangerous. Like, the administrative stuff, like, the church has dealt with that for thousands of years, and we're going to figure it out.
That's not even a problem. And like that's what kind of annoys me, is that like people make administrative issues into like apologetic stuff, and it's like, dude, like we don't do that. We don't even do that with Roman Catholics, to be honest. Like, we don't even do that to that extent, right? Like, like for example, in Antioch there are 3 Roman Catholic bishops. Like, The only time I ever mention that is when a Roman Catholic makes the "you guys are not united" argument, because that's an obvious administrative problem in Roman Catholicism. But it's an administrative problem, right? But in regards to
Same
kind
with
of
the
like,
jurisdictional problem in America, you know,
yeah,
like
yeah. And
it's one of
in terms of like
the-
to and like because I need to anticipate that some people might be listening to this and not know Orthodox ecclesiology and say, wait, Metropolitan Onufri, you say he's under Moscow, but you also said that Patriarch Kirill is, has good relations with Putin. Doesn't that mean that Onufri is just a puppet of Patriarch Kirill? That is a very clear proof you have zero clue about Orthodox ecclesiology, because there is a basic question: who has canonical power and autonomy over Ukraine? Not Kirill. Kirill cannot. If Patriarch Kirill said you're gonna do this in Ukraine, Metropolitan Onufri is just gonna say, I'm the one saying that. No, I'm the one supposed to be saying that. What are you doing? You are telling me to do something for you, but that's my decision to make, dude. Get out, because Moscow recognizes some form of, even though they're not autocephalous, meaning they're not their own head, right? They are still autonomous. They still make decisions of their own, independent of the Moscow Patriarchate. Guess who's also similar? Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. In the United States, Metropolitan Hilarion is the one making the decisions, the final calls in the Russian Church in America, or in Europe, etc. So
Yeah.
Metropolitan Onufri, in fact,
Moldova.
several bishops ceased commemorating Patriarch Kirill, and that itself is proof that these bishops and Metropolitan Onufri, that's proof that they're not just minions of Patriarch Kirill. Are they under him? Yeah, but being under, it's not like they're Chechens being under Russia, right? They are under in the sense that Patriarch Kirill has responsibility, over Ukraine, etc. But who has a direct power to make decisions in Ukraine, ecclesiastically speaking? Onufri, Metropolitan Onufri.
Well, and ultimately, it's Patriarch Kirill reserves the right to call a pan-Russian council, and then Metropolitan Onufri would then go to represent Ukraine. But there's still a Ukrainian council of bishops. He is over them. He can call a local synod of the Ukrainian bishops. Like, I mean, look at Moldova. Moldova's under the Moscow Patriarchate, and if you want to read some pretty what I would call awesome statements about the stabby, you should read what the Moldovan metropolitans had to say. It was a lot better than what the Russians had to say.
Yes.
And yet they were they're still supposedly directly, like, they're in the same relationship with them, as they might even be not as autonomous as the Ukrainians are, and they're still having these.
I mean, another example is Mount Athos. There's many communities, monastic communities in Mount Athos. Mount Athos is directly under the EP, but many of these communities say things that oppose what the EP has been doing in Ukraine. Archbishop Anastasios of Albania is under the EP. He's the Albanian Archbishop. Guess what? He opposes what the EP has done in Ukraine. So this is not like Patriarch Bartholomew is not like the Pope of Orthodoxy. Patriarch Kirill is not the Pope of Russia. Okay, he's not the Pope of Ukraine. Or like, these ideas are just like completely made up fictional Reddit ideas that have no basis in ecclesiological reality. And when people try to like make analyses like that, they just show themselves to completely not know what the heck they're talking about. They completely show themselves to everyone that is in the Orthodox world. You know what they're saying? They're saying, "I am a fool, punch me in the head." That's basically what they're saying to everyone when they like make these stupid statements that has no basis in reality. And that's why I usually tell people who are like new to the faith, like, the administrative problems are like, why do you care? Why do you care about the administrative problems? You should focus on the spiritual problems for you, your own spiritual growth, because these things are not going to edify. They're features of the world. And there are saints that say, you need to know the spirit of the world in order to be able to combat it. That's the most you need to do. You need to be able to combat it. But in order to be able to combat it, you need to gear up yourself, it's like you can be a level 2 character. You can analyze the final boss all you want. You can read all of the guides you want. If you're level 2 and you're fighting the final boss, you're getting smashed. Doesn't matter. Like, it's that kind of logic. So you need to be preparing yourself spiritually as well, and engage in spiritual growth. And there's there's a point where these administrative problems are just going to be irrelevant to you, and that's kind of like what I personally recommend doing. That's kind of
Yeah, and
like
if you
why I
want
don't like enjoy talking about it, but if it helps clarify these things to people, I think it's very much beneficial. Definitely.
Look, if you want to learn about the ecclesiology and the canon stuff, what you shouldn't do is go on Twitter, say a bunch of half-baked opinions, and then have people then talk to all the people that are going to roast you in your DMs and then change your opinion. Don't do that. What you should do is read. I was going to get up and get it, but I actually don't know if it's on my shelf, so I won't do it right now. But read The Solution to the Situation in Ukraine by Metropolitan Nikiforos of Kikos, who's a Cypriot bishop whose patriarch commemorates the OCU schismatics, but him and the other and Metropolitan Neophytos and other, like literally half of the Cypriot Synod, they don't commemorate the OCU. And he lays out you can read it in one day, it's like 90 pages. He lays out a succinct historical, canonical, and contextual understanding for exactly why what went down was totally wrong. And it's not from some Russian, it's not from some, crazy person in America, it's from a Cypriot bishop. And people, and this is the thing, like think about how complicated the situation is, like you and me could like trying to talk to someone who doesn't know anything about Orthodoxy, you'd have to explain for like a whole hour of context to even know what half of these terms mean. And this is the kind of stuff that makes it so easy to like people look at this and like, well, this is just a big administrative mess. I'm not even going to look into the truths of it. Like that's the kind of things that the enemy uses to divide the church, to obfuscate things, to make it look like there's no real spiritual unity or real spiritual effect that, this theanthropic body of the church can do. And you need to ignore all of that. You need to live your sacramental life and evangelize the way the scriptures say, not fall for the political and ecclesiological machinations of the devil.
Yeah, I mean, even the Gentiles in the Old Testament period converted to the true faith during these political situations. So it's not as if like there's like a historical precedence to it, and this is why I always advocate like an actual historical theocultural analysis of these things, because when you have the secularist mindset, it's always about like what feels good for me. It's all about my own passions. Oh, this feels good to me, I'm gonna choose this. But that's just choosing the passions. That's just choosing an earthly mode of thinking. An earthly mode of thinking and making decisions is gonna get you the earth. It is not gonna get you the spirit. Okay, that's as simple as that. But I think yeah, like we talked about the canonical situation. I think we already mentioned how Metropolitan Nufri is in Ukraine, whereas the fake one is in Greece, like a coward he is. And he's really the only one that's standing his ground, right? And he's made statements about how Russia's actions is a result of fratricide. And, is that true? Like, I don't agree with that. But you know what I'm going to say? He should be saying that. I mean, he represents Ukraine. He represents the nation that is being attacked. What do you expect him to say? Like, it will be silly of him to kind of be like, yeah, okay, do it. Like, no, he's going to defend his own people. He's going to defend his own nation. He's going to help the people, his own people that's going to suffer as a result of this war. That's what his job is. That is literally like,
and look, man,
the whole point of his job,
Like Metropolitan Onufri's statement, like some people see that and are like, oh, so he's on the side of like the Ukraine Twitter account and all this stuff like that. Like, that's not what he's saying. Like, if you go, once again, people like cite the statement and have no idea the context of this. If you've kept up with the situation since 2015, 2016, 2017, 2014, however far back, Metropolitan Onufri has made multiple calls for stopping the violence in the Donbass, for dialogue with the LPR and the DPR, and while like he has held that he wants to like keep the Ukrainian state together, I guarantee you that like Metropolitan Onufri has a similar perspective to me, in the sense that he wishes that Putin or someone would have had a more diplomatic and involved situation earlier on, before the hostilities got so bad. It's not like he's saying this because he suddenly now supports everything the Zelensky regime has done and likes being ruled by them. That's not what's happening. This is it's not political, it's supra political, it is above the political, where the political is just an aspect of it.
And this is what people are missing, because like they don't understand. Like, for example, Saint Nicholas of Japan, when he was addressing to the Orthodox Christians who are Japanese, who converted to the Orthodox faith during the Sino-Russian or Russia-Japan war, his students asked him, should we pray for Russia? Because that's the Christian nation. Japan is not the Christian nation. So should I be praying for my nation or should I be praying for yours? And St. Nicholas of Japan said, you should be praying for your own nation. You should be praying for your own nation to win this war against mine. I mean, the point that he's saying, he's not just kind of like promoting relativism. It's really the opposite. What he's promoting is love for your nation, love for your people. He's promoting patriotism, which is what Metropolitan Onufri is doing for Ukraine. You can have whatever opinion you want about, you can think, oh, Ukraine is not a real nation or whatever. Okay, fine, have that view. Might even be true, but you have to admit that someone who lives in that country, someone who is still hosted in that country, even though he's treated badly, still has the responsibility to speak in an ecclesial manner for that country. This is something that the Western mindset does not understand, that you can be in the right while defending the wrong country if you're in that. Like, they kind of don't really understand. It's like, like you can admit that your family has been doing wrong things while still supporting them because they're your family. I mean, that's kind of like the same logic.
Yeah, and like it's not like it's not like Saint Nicholas was like, I'm sure all those same people were also praying for the conversion of their nation,
Yes.
like it's this like I'm sure that was happening at the same time. And of course this is like biblical and whatnot. Like the Bible extols the virtues of certain people that were not necessarily like King Cyrus the Great. He wasn't Jewish. He wasn't of the of the religion of the nation of Israel, worshiping the true God. But he's still praised by, like, he still did things, and like there were still good things said about him as a leader of his nation and whatnot. Like, these are the kind, like, virtue is still virtuous even if the person doing it isn't, like, and obviously they would still have to be doing it for the right reasons, but like there's still virtuous behavior.
Yeah, I mean,
the love of one's nation and love of one's family
is not representing Ukraine because he is in line with Americanism. In fact, he rejects Americanism. He is defending Ukraine because of the people that live in it. The people. He's doing it for the people. He's doing it for the right reasons. He's doing it for the Orthodox faith in Ukraine. And this is why, like, he's such an important character. And I think, like because for years his church, like, his churches have been vandalized. His parishioners have been attacked by the schismatics and the Roman Catholics, and even by the government, by Azov, etc. I mean, he's been going through persecution for years just because he is under Moscow, as if that's means something extremely important, right? What does he do, right? He suffers, and still, this is the authentic Christian character of a bishop who really loves his country, who really loves his flock, and who really represents them fully. And this is kind of what the Christian faith is about, is that we need to kind of follow people like these in spirit. And this is why, like, we've been talking about it for like half an hour, is because he is a very critical part about the good aspect of Ukraine that Ukraine needs. Ukraine needs Metropolitan Onufri. I mean, without him, honestly, I think Ukraine will kind of be wrecked without him, to be honest. I mean, if there's any reason why it stands, it's kind of because of him and what he represents and the people who operate under the same spirit that he operates, which is ultimately the Spirit of Christ, the Holy Spirit. That's what he's operating by. Whereas the schismatics, what is the spirit? It's the spirit of the world. The spirit of the world is the reason why Epiphany Domenko is a coward who's hiding in Greece, because he is of the spirit of the world. The Spirit of God is courageous and stands firm against the dangers of the evil one, which is why he is in Ukraine in spite of these dangers, right? And that's something that, again, the secular he's never going to understand this. He's not going to understand it. He's going to ignore this as well, because if he admits the courageousness of this act, he will have to say, wow, these religious people, something's cool about them, I guess, but these virtues themselves, again, they only exist in a religious worldview. And this is really kind of like how stories are born while they retain their reality.
Well, and people don't understand how, like, and God can work in whatever mode he wants in the world, but ultimately, we know from the incarnation that God works through the Christ that's within people. And people act like the only thing God can do is like, oh, there got to be like a pillar in the sky, or someone has to get healed from cancer after praying. Like
Yeah.
that stuff can all happen. But in reality, most of the time when God acts in the world and when God speaks to you and when God makes something in your life, it's because someone in your life who's being prayerful, who is living in the Spirit, who is embodying Christ within them, who is experiencing theosis, God will use them to instrumentalize in your life.
Yes.
And that's why we have saints. That's why we have saintly bishops that do things. People are like, oh, you idolize people. You say people that are still alive are like holy and whatnot. And it's like, well, look, if someone is like we were able to know these things in time, and by their fruits you will know them. And when people don't understand that when people do something and live in Christ, that is Christ doing it through them. It's not their fallen nature submitting it. It's Christ doing it. And I'm not saying that everything that's happening in this war is Christ actively doing it, but that's how things are changed. That's why the saints are the drivers of church history, because they are the mechanism that Christ and God, that the Trinity uses to show itself in the world, to answer prayers, to perpetuate the good. And yeah, a secular person can just never understand that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, again, for a lot of Russians and even Ukrainians, what we've said, that's how they think, right? I mean, that's the manner in which even the ones that don't go to church often, that mindset is at the very least subconsciously present within them, because it is, I mean, Orthodox Christian identity is like instrumental to Russian culture and history. This is not to say that
great. Like, I mean, he, like, you know, we'll never know how, you know, truly pious he was. People would say like, oh, he only converted because he liked the people he sent liked the liturgy and they didn't want to become Muslim because there was no alcohol. Like, sure, that stuff is all true and historical, but ultimately the Holy Spirit used the sacraments of the church, brought that leader in, and then used him, which I think is evidence that he was actually a holy person, and used him to spread the gospel throughout an entire nation. And it wasn't like every single tribesman in Russia had an experience where like an angel appeared to them and preached them the gospel. No, most people probably didn't have a spiritual experience, but the church and the sacraments of the church and those saints that were in the church at the time were able to spread the true gospel to everybody. And that's something that people who look at the world and don't see God, or don't see like the magic, or don't see like the work of the Holy Spirit, like, it's because you don't know what you're looking what to look for.
Exactly. And I think that will kind of like be a good conclusion to the stream, because it's been more than 2 hours, and I've been talking for like, I think like 4 hours or something. So without like,
you've been streaming it up.
Well, I got stamina, but the mental stamina is a little bit here, because I'm kind of like out of ideas to like, what can I talk about to farm more content? But
I could go for hours here. I could just I could analyze the situation into the ground, pull up maps.
We are. What is the exact term? I forgot. Like, what was it? I'm monitoring the situation. I'm monitoring the situation right now, presently speaking to you.
Yeah, we've got autists on deck checking it all out, making sure it's holding it down.
The autistic elves are working for us. They are telling me all the news.
I should be having a new article. It should be out tomorrow, just kind of about the situation. You know, I'm sure it'll touch on some of the stuff we talked about here. It'll have great links, maps, and stuff, and some analysis. But yeah, check that out on turleytalks.com in the next few days.
Yeah, I mean, I showed the map on the stream. I think it's still on here. Yeah, there's the map from, I can't even see what it is. This from Institute for the Study of War. This is as of March 8th. 3 p.m. EST, the situation in Ukraine right now. Again, Ukraine is a big country, and even quick wars, quick wars last weeks, sometimes even multiple months. That doesn't mean that it's going slow. And in fact, what we're seeing right now, a lot of things are, as a matter of fact, going very quickly. So even though, again, I'm not going to give dates.
Military historians will look on this, and ultimately when the military books are written, it'll be viewed as a very successful operation. I think that's fair
the way it is going at the moment. I mean, we also got to understand, anything can happen, right? Like tomorrow we might wake up and something insane happens that no one could think of, so it's not as if we know what's going to happen. It's just that if things go the way they are going, like right now, with the same tempo, this should be resolved in a couple of weeks, in my personal opinion. Not
Yep.
geopolitical or war strategical advice. Not telling you that you should base your moves on that, but that possibility, and they go, Zelensky and Putin sitting on the same table. I'm true, they're representatives, of course, sitting on the same table, negotiating these things, and then saying, hey, you know what? Russia, we're going to meet your demands, and you're going to get your troops out of our country, okay? And over. That is more than enough to complete the situation, right? I think the worst case scenario for every single person involved, especially, I mean, really everyone involved, especially for Ukraine, is this conflict being prolonged. I mean, if Ukraine wants to see this through the end, you know what's going to happen? A lot of cities are going to become ghost towns, okay? And that's not going to be pretty. No one's going to like that, okay? And Ukraine might even lose itself if that goes on. So this is why, like,
and the multipolar realignment, like the global, I don't want to say a Cold War, but the global conflict that's come out of this has just begun.
Yes.
And even when the conflict in Ukraine resolves, the world's a different place now. And we're
Exactly.
going to, and like we said this a million times in the stream, but we don't know what's going to come after that. But it's kind of a second, it's, I think, kind of the second iteration.
I mean,
of what
I mean, the sanctions, the sanctions aren't going to be magically lifted. Oh yeah.
One second, I was saying, because like Metropolitan Neophytos, like a few weeks before COVID started, said we're about to enter a new mode of living. This is the last normal week of the world. Like that was about 2 years ago now. Like now that another 2 years have passed, we're kind of entering the next stage of all of that. And I think that's why, like, the prophetic words of some of these holy people, keep up with that. Subscribe to Uncreated Light Press on YouTube. Watch those videos
and subscribe to me if you haven't.
And follow me on Twitter at Gnomerad, GNOMERAD. Give me a follow.
Don't follow me on Twitter. I post some stupid stuff there. But yeah, exactly. I was just gonna. What was I gonna say? I forgot what I was gonna say. But that's just mental fatigue.
Something about sanctions. But...
Oh yeah. I just said that. I was just trying to say that the sanctions they're not gonna get magically lifted. Okay, like it's. We end, like, unless it ends tomorrow, these sanctions are gonna be staying for quite some time. Okay, no matter what the results are, like even if Russia loses,
well, the Russians said their export ban is till 2023 at the minimum.
Yeah,
it's the long haul here.
Yeah, I mean, hey, hey, I live in Turkey. We didn't sanction Russia. We said we're not gonna do that. So like, I'm chilling. I mean. It's gonna be good for the countries that didn't do it. That's the funny part. But it's still like it's still the new mode of living is not gonna be good.
And one final thing, just this is a little more schizo pill. Not really, but like the prophecies are still like what have been said by the saints in the past is still very much like it's been relevant. I think they've been predictive, and I think they're still prescient because. Just an example, Metropolitan Neophytos said that Turkey and Russia will turn on each other like overnight. And right now we're seeing that makes a lot of sense because Turkey is not like going through this gradual process of like alienating Russia. Like they're still very much like, no, we're going to play ball with these people. And then another country that was surprisingly not pressured into sanctions was Georgia. Like I expected the Georgian regime to totally sanction Russia, not because the Georgian people want to, but because the Georgian regime it's very it has a lot of Western control, but the Georgians had wanted nothing to do with that. And Saint Gabriel Ergabadze of Georgia, he said that when stuff starts to hit the fan, Georgia will be protected by the Mother of God. And I think we're seeing I think we're starting to see which places might be safer and be hit more hard and be more, perhaps God might take his hand of protection away from certain areas. We're starting to see where that stuff might happen start to shake out.
Yeah, and it's all real and it's all optimism. In an atheist world, what are you gonna get? Oh, but it's cold hard truth. No, atheism doesn't even believe in truth. What are you talking about? But in here, it's
we know who wins.
God already won. Yeah, God already won. We're going through the motions, and we're trying to find out: are we gonna be on the winning side, or are we going to be on the earthly side? And even if we win on the earth, right? Like maybe we get rich or whatever. That's all of the things of the earth is gonna vaporize. It's gonna go away. Okay, you're not gonna retain it. What you're gonna retain is your soul and the resurrected body, and what you did with it. And if you didn't do good things, difficult stuff for you. But it was a great stream. I really enjoyed this. I think it was really helpful as well. We had a consistent triple-digit viewer count like throughout the
Still
stream,
set.
which is insane. And I want to finalize this by thanking everyone who's been my patron and financially supporting my channel. Thank you so much. I appreciate everything. You, the viewer, you, the liker, you, the subscriber, and you, the financier. Okay, I'm gonna call you guys the financiers. Okay, because you're. I guess that sounds cooler. Father Justin, the new pitcher. Thank you so much, Father Justin. Node, Maximus, Mitch, Jonathan, Steven, Vlad, Kerry, Ignatius, Mike, Jack, Nectarius, Flooded Basement, Dave, Colton, Seraphim, and Norbert. And Conrad, I don't see your name here, so you gotta fix that. Just kidding. But
I guess I'll shekel. I'll give you some shekels.
Thank you.
I'll use the.
Thank you.
I need to hit. You need to hit my wallet though. You need to hit my wallet with the super chats from last show.
Oh yeah. I'll do that. I'll do it. No problem. Well, there were no super chats this one, so
I know.
I don't have any debts to you. I don't have to pay any debts for you. But thank you all for watching this, everyone. Hope maybe there might be a continuation of this if people wanted. But thank you all for watching this. I will see you all in the next video. There will be a video tomorrow. There will be a stream on Thursday. See you all there. And until then, take care. May God be with you.